And I'm so excited to talk to you today about one of my very favorite topics, which is user experience, specifically how a strong user experience can be designed to create a digital front door that converts. Next slide, please.
Okay.
All right, so I will be
Um,
talking through a few major points. First, of course, what the digital front door, what is it? Major barriers to conversion. And then on the other side of that same coin, I'll be talking about user experience best practices. And I'll end on key takeaways and leave time for questions. Hopefully at the end, I have a lot of content to get through and I get very excited. So hopefully I'll leave a good amount of time for questions. With that, let's begin. Next slide, please. All right. The digital front door is the online entry point where potential patients first interact with your brand, encompassing your website, mobile experience, and other digital touch points. It sets the tone for trust, credibility, and user experience. Today's consumer now expects that this digital front door experience is truly seamless. If you think about the context of today's users, they're used to instantaneous content available to them. Whether they are messily typing typoed queries into Google, or whether they're rapid fire searching something in Amazon for same day shipment because they realize they need something, the places that they search in and the places that they frequent will return the key resources for them to have them engage with, aid in their research process, and ultimately get them to buy in or to buy. Now, why does this matter to us? Here are a few quick stats that I have for you on screen here. And a quick disclaimer, as someone who has been in user experience for a long time, data has always been quote unquote my best friend. So you will see a ton of stats in my presentation, in this case, to help me convince you that what I'm saying truly does matter to your bottom line conversions. Let's jump in. First impressions, 94% of a website's first impressions are based on its design. That means that people who find your site immediately judge your entire brand and your entire business based purely on what your website looks like. We are very superficial. This tells us that there's a huge opportunity for us to make sure that your website feels modern, it is true to your brand pillars, and it feels really usable. Second, in a similar vein, 75% of website credibility is immediately based on aesthetics. So what users see actually determine whether or not they feel that they can trust your brand. And lastly, what's the risk? What is the risk in not investing in your digital front door and making sure you have a great experience? 88% of users are less likely to return to a site after a bad user experience. So this tells us if you defy user expectation, if you make it hard for your users to find content that they're looking for, that you've likely lost them as a return user and therefore a prospect or patient. Next slide, please. Now, what can we do to make sure your digital front door is optimized, gives a really good impression, and ultimately drives us towards conversion? I'll talk about, again, a few major barriers to conversion and then end with our major UX best practices to make sure that you're optimizing that digital front door. So there are a few major barriers to conversion that I'll be walking you through. The common culprits that we find include confusing navigation, slow load times, lack of clear calls to action, and inconsistent branding. These barriers frustrate users and they can send them right back to the search engine where they might find your competitor or, get lost in the sea of what they can find online to explore and engage with. We certainly don't want that happening. So let's talk about how we can make sure we overcome those barriers. Next slide, please. All right. First and foremost, simplifying navigation is probably the most important thing that drives your overall website experience, at least in terms of helping your users find the content that they are seeking. Studies show that 94% of users say that an easy navigation is by far and away the most useful website feature to them. You'll see in my visual on screen that I highlight what I'm talking about in this case when I'm talking about navigation. So we have our utility navigation, our global nav, local nav on page, and our footer navigation. What we want to do across all of these points is to create a frictionless experience. How do we do that? First, we focus on conversions. This means that you'll have to establish and agree upon major goals and focus areas for directing your users to. That is something you'll have to do as a business unit. Make sure you have an alignment and agreement, and then make sure that you're showcasing that properly on your website across the board and highlight it visually within your user interface. Secondly, you want to make sure that you're streamlining your menus. So when I say menus, in this case, I'm speaking to global and utility navigation. There are user tests that do indicate that 7 major categories within your global navigation is going to be your sweet spot in terms of how far you can go. Anything below that is highly usable. The less content we have to digest, the easier it is for users to get through stuff. Now, I will say I have seen many cases where more than 7 certainly makes sense, especially with the complexity of healthcare. I think it is helpful to sometimes have more, but I would do a quick test. If those 7+ categories that you have don't logically all fit together, feel wildly varied or a little bit complex and confusing together, I would question whether or not you want to include all of those items. Third, we have breadcrumbs. This is how Hansel and Gretel got their way back to their house or their home. I think that's how the fairy tale goes. And this is how we help our users get back to a higher level page that they were on before they landed on your page. It's something that's easy within local navigation to make sure you include on your website to help users navigate. And then lastly, search functionality. Search functionality is incredibly helpful for users. Oftentimes when people get to your website, they have an idea of what they want to find, and search really helps enable that. One word of caution in regards to search, however, search has to be implemented correctly in a user-friendly way in order for it to be successful. A quick test is to run through some key logic. You could pull data and look at key search terms that people are actually searching, and then make sure that what your search functionality is returning is accurate. So for instance, if someone is searching orthopedic services in one of the many ways that orthopedic is spelled, and it's not always returning an actual result, that might warrant you taking a look at the logic that drives your search. All right, next slide, please. All right. Next, we have load times. This is something that has major user experience implications as well as major impacts on SEO. So improving load times will do quite a bit for your business from both perspectives and will absolutely directly impact your conversions. Now, a few best practices to keep in mind here. First and foremost, you want to make sure you're compressing your images. These are the things that tend to be the heaviest load on your website. Therefore, we have to take that special attention to make sure that they're compressed. Secondly, you want to make sure you are reducing your plugins. Take regular inventory of any plugins that your website is leveraging to make sure that anything that's unnecessary or unused is not there anymore. This will not only help load time, but it will reduce security risks that you may introduce by having old plugins that are not maintained that are attached to your website. Third, you want to be leveraging browser caching. So enable caching to allow return users to load your site even faster, giving them an ideal user experience. And lastly, use a content delivery network, fondly known as the CDN, to store content closer to users geographically and therefore speed load times up even more. Now, why does this matter? A 1-second delay in page load can result in a 7% reduction in conversions. That is pretty massive. I think it really speaks to how consumers now are, again, used to that instantaneous result and instantaneous access to information that gets at exactly what they want. And I will say in mobile, this can actually be even more pronounced. Next slide, please. All right, next we have CTA clarity. This might be something that feels a little bit trivial in comparison to some of the other pieces I've referenced, but I will say based on data that we've seen in user tests, A/B tests, and just general user experience knowledge, that this does make a massive impact to your conversions. So a few things I want to call out. First and foremost, use action-oriented language for your CTAs. Things like schedule now, book appointment, call today. They are more actionable, they're more clear to a user, and they do perform better. The data indicates that they perform better. Second, make sure you're considering the placement. So not only do we want to make sure we're showing CTAs above the fold, we want to make sure they're also accessible across other key moments in the website. We might even suggest that you feature your major goal CTAs within your global navigation and then make your entire global navigation sticky so that even as users scroll, they have ready access to that CTA button at any point in time. Third, design and color. Color contrast actually plays a huge role in driving users to click or not click. It's something that I have personally seen. I have an example on the right within a user test that I've conducted where I saw an immediate 23% increase in conversion from simply taking something that was less of a contrast between background, button, and text. We boosted that up and we immediately saw that lift. I've also heard of plenty of other user tests that indicate similar types of lifts in conversion through simple design changes of their buttons. Other things I've heard impacting greatly include things like making sure that the actual CTA link looks like a button. That has massive impacts, and giving it adequate white space around it to draw more focal attention there. And last but not least, keep it simple. We see that when we introduce too many CTAs on a page that we actually see an overall decline in conversions. This is because it feels a little bit unfocused, and rather than having one central goal, we have many, and sometimes we see a direct decline at times in conversions with that approach. Next slide, please. All right, last on our list for barrier to conversion, brand and UI consistency. Brands that are consistently presented are 3.5 times more likely to be trusted by consumers. Design is one of those very tricky things. There's a saying that I strongly agree with, that good design tends to disappear, but you can always see bad design. So in this case, if the entirety of your digital presence looks really disjointed, the everyday user may start to question the validity and credibility of the brand. Is it a scam? Is it a brand that is in its infancy stage? These are impressions we do not want to give our users. It's not a good thing. So on the other hand, if we present a unified and strong brand across all touch points, we build and create trust. So how do we build that trust? Through visual consistency, through consistent tone of voice, saying similar messages to our audiences across all touch points, and then making sure that both of those are pulled through, not only within your website experience, but across all major digital touch points. Next slide, please. All right, those were my major barriers to conversion. Let's talk now about user experience best practices. Again, I mentioned in the beginning, this is kind of the other half to the same coin here, but I do believe this will be equally helpful to you. So user experience is critical to your digital front door. It impacts appointment booking, patient satisfaction, how long users stay on your site, conversion, and more. Before I dive in, though, I do want to explain a little bit the odd image that I have on the right. So this is a fun story that, in my opinion, really embodies the spirit of user experience. The Ohio State University, when first considering how they wanted to lay down their pathways on their quad to connect building from to connect their buildings across its quad, waited an entire year before they did so. What was the intent of doing this? They knew that students had to get from point A to point B, so they let the students carve the paths through the quad based on the natural progression of where they were trying to get to. And by the end of the year, what they saw was etched pathways or desire paths within the quad that clearly spoke to the most common traveled paths. After they had that, this really cemented to them what the main desire pathways were for these users. They paved them, they prioritized them based on how wide the path was, and therefore they drew conclusions that this was a prioritized or heavily trafficked path. And it really created the map for how they cemented the sidewalks into their quad. This is the same principle we follow for user experience. We follow the data of how our users engage within our sites. We follow our user research for what users say are hard for them to find, and we leverage those pieces to ensure that we pave the path for them within our website experiences. As we design these digital desire paths, we focus on a few main themes. So first, critical review of major user flows, making sure that we're even understanding the paths that people are trying to take. Second, simplifying and clarifying paths through intuitive design, making sure the pathways are straightforward, easy to access, and well-designed. Third, ensuring accessibility and consistent experience across mobile. And lastly, incentivizing engagement. Unlike at Ohio State, where students needed absolutely no motivation to cross the quad, we have to provide engaging content and interactive experiences to encourage our users to explore our site and go around our website. Next slide, please. So let's dive in there. I saw a logistics nerd comment, and I love that. All right, let's talk about our user experience best practices. First and foremost, we have to make sure we're optimizing your major conversion paths for your users. Every additional step in a conversion process can reduce conversion significantly. In this case, I have a stat that says it's up to 20%. That's varied across, sometimes it's more. Sometimes it's less. So how do we do that? We need to take a critical review of the user flows, identify the major conversion points that are highest of value and therefore prioritized, and then conduct a path analysis audit of that. That is my recommendation as a very good place to start once you have those conversion points identified. That analysis allows you to step into the shoes of your patients and users and essentially walk through the website experience, trying to conduct the things that you want them to from a conversion standpoint. We also want to leverage true data to support our analysis. So performance data, heat maps, any other critical data that helps us see true action on the website is really helpful here. And lastly, listening to your users is really important. So if you have the opportunity to do patient or user interviews, that can be really critical in understanding key friction points. Next slide, please. All right, our second UX best practice is to support wayfinding. So navigation plays a huge role here, but there are other wayfinding points that are core to our user experience. The point of supporting wayfinding is to reduce users' cognitive load through thoughtful design. First, I want to mention white space can actually be your best friend here. When presenting information, white space allows you to create key areas of focus rather than shoving everything together. It allows your eye to bounce from place to place and direct them visually, really to content that they want to see. Second, grouping things logically is incredibly helpful. As we know, the current user does not read. Nobody reads things in full anymore. We all scan. In fact, users read about 20 to 28% of the words on a page typically, meaning that anything with skimmable layouts and clear headings can improve content engagement up to 47%. This tells us, from our perspective, we need to meet our users in the middle. So leveraging headings, headlines, subheadings, bullet points, those are all really nice pieces to introduce to your content, especially in thick content heavy pages, to make sure your users can scan. Now, I do want to call out an example I have on the page. You'll see I have a navigation before and after. This was for a hospital site where we took the patient resource tab within their navigation. Initially, what we saw was kind of a catch-all list listed in alphabetical order for patient resources. What we then did ourselves is we categorized based on user intent and high-level categories that made logical sense, and we grouped them by visiting, health information, resources, and quick links. And immediately we saw an improvement in task completion times as well as overall task completion rates. Next slide, please. Our third UX best practice is to make sure we are accessible. So this has major implications, especially for healthcare sites. We know that 1 in 4 Americans live with disability. Ensuring accessibility on your site can open your site up to millions of users. A few major takeaways here. Make sure you have alt text for your images. Make sure you have video captions. I'm jumping around a little bit. Make sure you have video captions. In some cases, depending on what level of compliance you're trying to get to, you might also need a video transcript. Your keyboard navigation has to be easy for a screen reader to use. An easy way to test that is for you to essentially click into your actual page and then hit the tab button. If the tab takes you in a logical flow that follows the general content hierarchy established on your page, you're probably in a good place. If you see that your tabbing process all of a sudden jumps you to the form, jumps you to part of your navigation, you need to take a look at the code and essentially make sure that that flow is logical to support a screen reader. And last but not least, color contrast and font size. That's a big part of design compliance, especially for visually impaired colorblind users. I have a screenshot on the bottom right of a color contrast checker that we leverage quite often. I would say if this is something that you want to leverage as well, easily Googling color contrast checker, WCAG will help you get to this place. Otherwise, I can send links after this webinar. You'll see here in this case, the grouping or the comparison of text to background will then give you a grade in terms of whether or not you pass or fail for the different levels of WCAG compliance. Next slide, please. All right, fourth, and this one will not be a surprise to anyone. Mobile usage has skyrocketed. We know that 74% of users are more likely to return to mobile-friendly websites. From a table stakes perspective, we need to make sure that your site is responsive, has fast load times, has consistent functionality, and has mobile-friendly CTAs. So in terms of mobile-friendly CTAs, Apple's human interface guidelines tells us that 44 by 44 pixels is the minimum tap radius to make sure that you avoid fat finger syndrome. Otherwise, you want to just make sure that your site does respond accordingly and has a consistent experience between mobile, tablet, and desktop. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm rushing because I realized I have not left a ton of time at the end. Last but not least, create engaging experiences. Engaging content can increase conversion rates by up to 72%. Things like interactive quizzes, tools, live chats are all ways for us to bring some interactivity to our websites. Personalization is very important as well, right? The more catered content is to our users, the more likely they will engage with it. And then video content. I think you've all probably seen the power of video. If you've watched a sleepy audience watch a video pop up mid-presentation, it's something that captures attention. It's something that is highly engaging, and we certainly recommend it for our website experiences. Next slide, please. It's the end, I swear. Okay, so our key takeaways, 5 things I'll leave you with. First, impressions matter. Make sure you're investing in your digital front door. Overcome conversion barriers with better navigation, UX, UI, better UX, UI, and clear messaging. Ensure that users across the board can access your website across ability levels and across device types. Engaging experiences certainly matter. Try and leverage those when possible. And then this one I'll leave you with, which is slightly different, and I haven't touched on it yet. Research-based resources are available to help you. Things like performance data, repositories of user tests, those are available to you on the internet. So Nielsen Norman Group is one of the giants here. It's something I leverage on a daily basis. It has massive amounts of user tests that you can leverage, nngroup.com. If you have any high-level thoughts about, hey, do users like a centered logo within navigation more, and does it perform better than left aligned? Those are things that Nielsen Norman Group will tell you. Okay, now I apologize. I left 3 minutes for questions. I'm gonna pop open the Q&A now and see what we have. All right. In a House of Brands framework, how do we make our digital experience feel more personal for specific patient groups? Tips beyond just having totally different sites for everyone. Rebecca asked that question. That is a very interesting approach. It's something we deal with quite often here at Cardinal. In terms of building within a brand framework, there is a benefit of leveraging similar templates for the 80% coverage where your brands will have similar interactions, similar conversions, and similar pathways. What we like to do is make sure we're creating that foundation and structure and then updating on top of essentially that skeletal layer, the UI, the user interface design, to make sure that we are then speaking to the brand. From a usability standpoint, the core of how the conversions will service most of your users will not change. However, we know that the CSS styling and the design will. In that case, switching just that final design layer for, again, 80% of those templates is going to be really, really helpful for you. I would say certainly content plays a role here as well, where you have to make sure you have curated content that speaks to those brands, speaks about those brands in a way that will resonate and be close to the brand tenets of each sub-brand. I know we have 1 single minute left. So I have one more question here for what the recommendation is when it comes to CTAs. How many would we ideally want on a page? That is a great question. I think it's less important. I guess I don't want to give a full guidance as to how many. The main point is to limit them, I would say no more than 3, depending on what kind of page it is. We need to create focus here, and having more than that makes it super challenging. With that said, interlinking is certainly something that we would recommend. Again, not a CTA, but an availability for a user to explore additional content. So I want to make that distinction. CTA, keep those limited, but any of those content exploration pieces, we certainly want to welcome that journey and exploration on the website. All right. I did it. It's 9:30, or sorry, it's 11:30. I'm in a different time zone. I want to thank everyone for their time and attention today. This was great. And any other questions, I might try and see if I can follow up separately via email for the rest of y'all. Thank you so much.